When it comes to the police use of force, all too often we don't have the actual hard data to say what's actually going on out there. And the reason for that, of course, is that the police departments fight to the death to make sure that that information is not tracked and is certainly not available for the public when it comes to both the lethal use of force and the non-lethal use of force. But in this case, thankfully, Connecticut is actually doing the right thing. So a 2014 law made Connecticut the first state to require all police departments to report every instance in which an officer discharges or threatens to use a stun gun, one of the most common forms of non-lethal force that the police can use. And so now we actually have a full year of data with which to figure out what's going on. Is it being used in the right ways or in the wrong ways? Well, overall, police reported 641 incidents involving stun guns last year, including 437 actual firings and 204 threats of use. Now, you can look at that in a couple of different ways. Hundreds and hundreds of people being stunned seems like a lot, but while Connecticut is certainly not California in terms of size, there are a lot of people, and so it is not perhaps an epidemic across Connecticut. But let's go a little bit deeper and see if maybe there's something once you break down the sorts of people being stunned. Well, 30% of the people involved in the overall incidents were black, and 21% were Hispanic. I grew up in Connecticut. There are Hispanic and black people in Connecticut. I don't believe that 30% of Connecticut is black, so overall that number might be somewhat disproportionate. Within the overall number of stun gun incidents, officers fired at them 60% of the time in cases involving whites, 80% of the time in cases involving blacks, and 69% of the time in cases involving Hispanics, which implies that when there is an incident and it goes from threat to actual firing, it is more likely to do that in the case of African Americans or Hispanics than in the case of Caucasians, although even they end up getting stunned the majority of the time. Now, let's talk about those warnings. Officers warned about firing, but did not do so at white suspects 40% of the time, black suspects 20% of the time, and Hispanic suspects 31% of the time. So that means that they did the threat, but didn't fire more often with whites. Now, why would that be? Is it because they just feel the need to warn them earlier in the process? Or is it that they're more hesitant to actually fire when the person is white, or more likely in the case of being a minority? I don't know, and they're trying to figure it out too. This is Michael Lawler, State Undersecretary of Criminal Justice Policy and Planning in Connecticut, who says, "It seems like in the cases where it was threatened but not used, there were far more white people involved. Why that is and whether there is some other explanation, we're going to go through the data and try to figure it out." I wonder what it could be. Maybe it's race. Seems like a pretty obvious pattern to me, but at the very least, we now have some hard data with which to make that argument. And that is, of course, a necessary condition for us to actually get them to change the policies and the culture in the police that leads to this racial disparity in the use of force. And in America, that change is a long time coming. And that's my final judgment.